pretty sure you guys know this about me. I'm a planner. Pre-COVID, James and I would sit down at least once a month and go over his entire work calendar. So I can put it in our family calendar and I can plan what our life would look like. Because James's job, I think most of you know, isn't a traditional 9 to 5. So he goes in when there's meetings and then he goes away and travels for work for days at a time. And so my schedule changes hugely depending on if he just has a couple meetings or if he's going to be traveling. But when the pandemic started, his travel just stopped. And the kids' schedules were empty and they were home all the time. And though we were busier than ever trying to work while teaching our kids from home, the calendar and planning lost all its importance. And then life shifted again as vaccines became more widely available and we started looking at the calendar 1 week at a time. Beyond that 1 week, I had no idea what was happening in my life, but I could plan 1 week. I'm sure I am not the only one who's looking ahead and not quite knowing what's coming. Reading articles suggesting that the winter surge of COVID is ahead of us, and others that suggest it's time to move on from pandemic to endemic thinking. And here we are, in the midst of all this unpredictability, making a shift together as a church, gathering in a new place, both in person and online. And what's ahead of us for us is uncertain. That is scary, an uncertain future. I don't think it has to be scary. We truly don't know where God is leading us right now. I'll just let you know, there is no secret plan that church council has, no secret plan that I have. We don't know where we are going after this year. And I don't mean to be alarmist, I'm just being honest. The future of our church after this year is uncertain. We only know that God is, in fact, leading us, helping us move ahead, but only one step at a time. In my mind, all this uncertainty started long before COVID. It was 4 years ago that the parking lot situation started. 4 years ago, when we prayerfully made a decision as a community not to spend money that we didn't have to buy the empty lot next door. Some of us came to that decision feeling certain that regardless of the parking lot, it was time for our church to move from our building on Euclid. Others came to that decision feeling cornered into it. What other choice was there when the price tag was hundreds of thousands of dollars that we didn't have? However, we got there. And God does call churches and individuals through a variety of means, both through joyful invitation and a complete lack of other viable options. With that decision, we stepped into the unknown together, relying on the Spirit to move us forward. That decision was like that moment in Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, as he faces a ledge and an abyss on his way to recover that Holy Grail. And I hope our younger crew has seen that movie. It's really good, guys. There is no way to jump from one side to the other. Indiana must make a step of faith. He must trust that despite his fear, despite the evidence of his eyes, there is something that will hold him and get him to the other side. He steps out in faith into nothingness, and yet he does not fall. These past 4 years have been a series of those steps for us as a community. To not buy the parking lot, to put our very beloved building up for sale, to move our worship to the upper room at First Christian, to move our worship online, to complete the sale of our building, and now to join in this partnership, this nesting with Freya ACC. There have been times during this particularly challenging months of life in the COVID pandemic that we have felt well positioned to be a church without a building because everybody was worshiping online. And there have been times, as we yearn to be back in person, that being a church without a building has been especially difficult. Because working out how to be together in person has had extra steps and questions and challenges. Now, I want to assure you that Berea UCC has been so generous and helpful. They are so excited to have us sharing space with them. They are so excited to work together, sharing their programs and their ministries, and sharing ours as well. They look forward to strengthening our relationship as two churches together, as churches covenanted together in the UCC. And despite how wonderful they are, this transition will have its challenges, simply because all transitions have challenges. Because we are taking a step out into the unknown in faith. Because this is different. This is change. It would have been hard making this step without a pandemic. And it is just a more complicated step because we have the added consideration of protecting the health and well-being of those joining in person, all the while maintaining strong connections with those who join us online. And we take this step in faith that God is with us. God is holding us. Unlike Indiana Jones, who crossed the abyss in a few steps in a few seconds, it's likely that some of us feel we have been on uncertain footing for quite a while, maybe for 4 whole years. And again, prayerfully and with much discernment, we made a choice together as a congregation to pause here for a year at Berea. And it's possible that this decision feels to some like we are pausing as we dangle over the abyss. And it might feel awful. It might feel like, why can't we just get to the other side of this transition? And I'll admit there are days that I crave certainty and security. Even knowing what the goal is, so we could make a plan and take some steps toward some kind of goal would be great. But that is not our purpose here. We have been listening and listening for the Spirit's call to us. And together, we heard and affirmed God's call to us to take Sabbath, to rest here. And God, as the Good Shepherd, has led us to this green pasture with cool waters. Our gracious host here at Berea UCC. God is calling us to breathe, to pause, to allow the uncertain questions of tomorrow to take a back seat for now. Because even though we are still in transition, even though we have been in transition for what seems like way too long, we are held. God is with us. I invite you to feel God's presence here with us right now. I invite you to welcome the gift of space and time. Sabbath. The Gospel of Mark was the first recorded gospel. It was recorded in a time of great upheaval. Now, when we consider Jesus' life and the life of Jesus' disciples, uncertainty could definitely describe them. Jesus lived a nomadic ministry, moving between the center of Judaism and the margins of society. And yet he showed calm and confidence despite the constant conflict and opposition he aroused. He was guided by grace and love in every step, all the way to the cross, even though his whole life was upheaval. The birth of the church, the birth of Christianity is no different. Amid empire and threats of war and the reality of oppression, this movement of Jesus followers takes root. The words of Jesus acknowledge the uncertainty and the insecurity through which his followers and the church navigate. Jesus says, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginnings of the birth pains. These are apocalyptic predictions we read in Mark. But Jesus' reference to birth pains can recall a difference between the end and an end. Perhaps the flip side of what we discussed several weeks ago in the difference between the beginning and a beginning. The word here for end is telos. It can be translated as goal, a point aimed at as a limit, conclusion, or result. These aren't entirely different than our translation, but if we have associated the end with the end of time in a linear chronology, some alternative translations may expand our associated connotations when we hear Jesus' words. The goal is still to come. The point at which we are aiming is still to come. The result is still to come. We may also recall the analogy believed to have been told originally in the tale by Pablo J. Luis Molinero and adapted by Henry Nguyen, among others, that demonstrated where an end and a beginning meet. The tale is of a set of twins in the womb who are discussing their existence. One reveals their belief in life after birth, at which the other scoffs, claiming the notion is ridiculously illogical. The believing twin isn't moved, articulating dreams of more light and the ability to use their limbs freely. When that twin mentions the parent, the skeptical twin scoffs again, noting that if there were such a thing as a parent, they would have seen them. The skeptical twin rejects the notion of life beyond birth and a parent. They don't believe in anything more than the womb. To this, the believing twin replies, "Don't you feel these squeezes every once in a while? They're quite unpleasant and sometimes even painful. I think that these squeezes are there to get us ready for another place, much more beautiful than this, where we see our parent face to face." Might our church's experiences of these past 4 years be our own birth pains? Might they be preparing us for what's ahead? Perhaps this time has taught us something, or planted some seeds that have not yet sprouted, or brought into question something that needs pruning. The Christian church in America has enjoyed a time of privilege and power that is now waning, and has been waning for some time, decades even. And I choose to believe that this is not the death of the church, so much as a rebirth. A rebirth that could also be called a reformation, a resurrection. The church has clung to what was, but through this pandemic, we have been forced to change more and change more quickly than churches are used to changing. We don't know, can't know what the church will be after this rebirth. It may very well lack the certainty and security it previously enjoyed through its power and privilege, at least in the white mainline Protestant traditions. I dream that such a church, having shed those supports and those shackles, may be better positioned for ministry that mirrors the life and work of Jesus among the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized, the orphan and the widow, those without fixed abode, and those without immigration documentation. I dream this church will share Christ's love, even more fully with actions than with words. That this church will be a place of transformation and grace. To be reborn, though, we must let go. Yield to uncertainty and to change. Today, we move one more step into that mystery with God, and we breathe. We call on God's presence to surround us and uphold us through this year of Sabbath. Like the Israelites in the wilderness, paused in an oasis, yet neither here nor there. Not in Egypt nor in the promised land, yet cared for with enough for today. God is with us, and we go together. May we do so with abundant grace for ourselves and for one another.